Welcome. We have as our guest today James W. Sutton, who is the heir and executor of the Agustin Blazquez Estate and the copyright holder on his novel, The Killer Flies of Luxor, and producer of his films, and perhaps his best friend. And we're going to talk today about the life and work of Agustin Blazquez, who, full disclosure, was a friend of mine, and we made a film together. First of all, James, welcome. If you have a copy of the book, if you could hold it up, because of this special effect, it disappears on my end. That's it, The Killer Flies of Luxor. Makes a nice last-minute Christmas gift if you don't have any. It's a beautiful book. And thank you. And I'm going to read Kirkus Reviews. Well, see, everything disappears here. Kirkus Reviews said, a passionately unconventional, revealing, yet fragmented account of an artist's journey. And I would say it's sort of like Don Quixote about a Cuban-American artist. And his Dulcinea is the lady behind me, Sara Montiel, who was a famous Spanish actress who made a film in Cuba called Cinnamon Skin, which is actually the title of a chapter in the book. And one of the characters in the book is also James W. Sutton, who's called Jaumes. And in my view, if Agustin Blazquez is the Don Quixote, Jaumes serves as his Sancho Panza in this picaresque tale, which is both a memoir but also a magical realist, surrealist, fantasy, dreamscape, and also meditation on freedom and the meaning of art in a repressive society, much of it set in Egypt, which is a symbol. So, James, what can you tell us about Agustin, the book, and actually the writing of the book, how it came to be?
Well, first of all, I would say the book is, Agustin wrote it in 1982. He never wanted to do anything with it. He didn't want to publish it for a long time, even though Larry was encouraging him to do so. I think partly because it's so revealing. And he kind of lived behind a slight veil. And this revealed a lot of what was behind the veil. And from it, you could get some understanding of how he did a lot of the things that he did, that it seemed things he did that he had no training to do. And he would just decide he could do it, and then he would do it. And everything he started, he finished. And where did all that come from? Where did those abilities come from? Where did the drive come from? I think a lot of that he kept kind of hidden in his life, but he revealed it in the book. So he wasn't ready to reveal all of that, I don't think, until late in his life, when he finally decided, okay, yes, he told Larry finally, yes, let's publish the book. So it is as Larry said, it's an insight into the mind of an artist and how the artist decides what to do, and how the artist has the confidence to do whatever it is he or she decides to do. Does that answer the question at all?
Yeah, it's a good start. Why don't you talk a little bit, though, about the Egyptian theme? You're in front of some Egyptian art that was painted by Agustin Blazquez. The cover of the book, even though it's about a Spanish movie star, has an Egyptian theme. What is the fascination with Egypt? What is the theme of Egypt? What is the trip to Egypt, the voyage to Egypt, which you're a character in the story? What is it about, and what does it mean?
Agustin was puzzled about his interest in ancient Egypt. Some of the drawings and paintings that he did as a little kid were ancient Egyptian style. He didn't know that's what they were. He was living in a small country town in Cuba where he grew up, and no one around him knew what they were. He didn't realize what they were until high school, when he was studying world history, and they got to the chapter on ancient Egypt. And then he said, wow, That's similar to style that I did years ago when I was a little kid. And then after coming to this country and getting situated, feeling confident in the situation that he was in this country, he started having dreams about ancient Egypt, floating through rooms with ancient Egyptian murals. And so then that inspired him to start doing Egyptian art. So he started doing art in the style of ancient Egypt. They're all original. Nothing that he did was a copy. He copied the style and the atmosphere, and the magic, I would say, of ancient Egyptian art. But all of the design was his own creation. And at his first exhibit that he had of his art in the United States of the Egyptian art, he invited people from the Egyptian embassy, and they said to him, they were amazed, shocked at what they were seeing. And they said to him, "Of course, you've been to Egypt." And he said, "No." And they said, "Well, we're going to see if we can do something about that." So about a year later, 1978, he was officially invited by the Egyptian government to visit Egypt. I went with him as his official photographer because part of it was to take photographs of the ancient Egyptian art that he could use as research material. And so we went, and we were there for 3 weeks. It was an amazing experience, amazing opportunity for me and for him, of course, and very inspirational for him. And so after coming home, he did a lot more Egyptian art that was inspired by what he saw there. And after a few years, the trip in 1978, in 1982, he decided to write a book. And a lot of what's in the book are the travel stories in the book. A lot of that is the trip to Egypt. So, but what he wrote about the trip of Egypt, some of it is what happened, and some of it was fantasy and dreams that he had or that he imagined when he was writing the book. I'm not sure. So it is dreams and fantasies mixed in with the reality of what happened to us while we were there, the experiences we had, and the impact of what we saw. And I think the dreams and fantasies were an impact of what he was taking in while we were there. So in 1982, he wrote the book, and finally, a few months before he passed away, he finally agreed. Larry kept hounding him over the years, let's publish it, let's publish it. And he would say no. But he finally said yes a few months before he passed. So he started typing the book into the computer because, of course, in 1982, there were no computers. So he wrote it on a typewriter. So he was busy doing that at the point that he passed away. So I finished typing the last ending chapters of the book from the 1982 manuscript, and then turned it over to Larry. And Larry has come up with this for us all. So I'm very appreciative for Larry for doing all of that. What else, Larry?
Well, you're a character in the book, and you also have some insight. A lot of people don't know about Agustin as an artist. They know him as a Cuban American documentary filmmaker. And some of them know him as a Cuban American journalist who wrote a lot of columns about Cuba. What is the relationship between his interest in Egypt and his relationship to Cuba?
That's a good question, and it's trying to read between the lines to come up with the answer to that. But certainly, Cuba was, from all accounts, a great place to live for him to grow up in. It was a wonderful family, and the freedom for the family to do what was best for the family. And then all of a sudden, that was gone. And he describes in the book what happened to him as a result of Castro coming in and having his own personal revolution taking over the whole country. And Agustin talks about what happened, how that impacted him and his family, and how ultimately he had to make the decision to leave Cuba. And you could say that the ancient Egyptian civilization was an incredible civilization that, for whatever reason, that ended. But they did incredible things, that building pyramids that still today we don't know how they did it. And they didn't have the technology that we have today. And it would be a struggle for us today with our technology to build it. And yet they did it without the technology we have today. So that was a great civilization that died out for whatever reason. The Cuban situation, we know why that died out. That was the conscious effort of Fidel Castro. So I don't know. It's a tricky situation, but and I don't know if that was I would say that was not the initial attraction that Augustine had to ancient Egypt, because he was doing ancient Egyptian art when he was a little kid, long before Castro and long before he knew what it was. So he had some sort of connection there, but it could very well be that the destruction of the Cuban culture was something that hit him in a similar way that made him appreciate the ancient Egyptian culture that had died out.
And he saw his work, I know, as preserving the Cuba that he grew up in before Castro, about various music and culture in a lot of his movies. Let me ask you another question. This tour you took, it was very interesting to me in the book. You went to all the great sites of Egyptian history, the pyramids, Luxor, various temples, tombs, Aswan, uh, and you met with a lot of what seemed to me very prominent artists and architects. You met the architect of the Sadat tomb. You met very famous Egyptian cultural figures. You were treated very well, and yet you had a lot of sort of misadventures with hotels, and you were supposed to do things that didn't happen. Tell us a little bit about that experience from your point of view in terms of what happened there.
Yeah, it's like in 1978 when we went, the it seemed to me, my impression was that at that time anyway, the only organized way to see Egypt was to go on a commercial tour, where an airline or whoever gets you there, makes arrangements for everywhere you're going to visit, everywhere you're going to sleep, everywhere you're going to eat, your 3 meals a day, and be herded from one place to another by the tour company. That's that was the way to have a practical visit and to see the maximum number of things that you could see. Um, because other than that, the country was rather disorganized at the time. Let me say right away, it was disorganized, but we always felt safe. At that time in Egypt, we felt safe everywhere we went. Everybody we encountered on the street, everybody from the government was wonderful and charming and tried to be helpful. It was great. But we were traveling, just the two of us, on arrangements made by the government for us, which was an incredible honor. But when we went to get on an airliner to go from one part of Egypt to another, the people from the airline had never seen individual airline tickets before. They had only seen group tickets for 25 people or 50 people purchased by the tour companies. So they were they were confused, and it left us confused and wasted time because of that kind of thing. But all of that became part of the overall aura of this, the magic of this trip was the fact that there were no reserved seats on any of these Egypt Air flights at that time. So it was a mad dash of everybody to get a seat on the plane. So those kind of adventures added a lot of local color and excitement to the whole thing. And then to show the opposite of once you got to the antiquity, and the antiquity is just so grand and so magical, and you are standing there and your brain is saying no, what you think you're seeing you're not seeing because it's too incredible, and then you try to logically convince yourself that it exists. And how in the world did they build this? The inspiration that these people must have had to do these things, and the contrast between that and the hotel where you sit on the bed and the bed collapses and you turn on the shower and you don't get anything but a mist, and you know it was all okay, it was all fantastic and wonderful. And I feel so honored that the Egyptian government let me go with Agustin. I was not an official guest, let me make that clear. um, but I was able to tag along with somebody who was an official guest. It was a wonderful experience for me personally, as well as, of course, for Agustin and the inspiration that it was for him.
One of the things that's in the book is he was actually interviewed, I think, by Egyptian newspapers and other outlets, and you had meetings with government officials and various ministers, professors at the art schools. What was that like? What was the artistic and cultural world like? What were those conversations like?
Yeah, it was interesting that the government officials asked, when we got there, they asked Agustin, what do you want to see? And of course, he said, I want to see the antiquities, as many as possible while I'm here. And the Egyptian government really was the ones that came up with the idea. We'd also like to introduce you to current artists in current working artists in Egypt, Egyptian artists, and share so you can see what they're doing and they can see what you're doing, and as well as educators and some government officials. And so it was very interesting to go to the homes and studios of some artists that were working at the time in Egypt. And as you said, we met we were invited to dinner to a professor's house, and there we met the architect who designed Sadat's memorial. And we went to the memorial with him, and he explained to us his theories behind the design of that memorial, which has a very Egyptian flair to it, by the way, which seems so appropriate. So it was very interesting to see his insights, get his own insights to what he had designed, and then to hear him and Agustin talking and sharing their thoughts of how each of their minds worked in coming up with what they created. And I will say, everybody that we met, from the government people to artists, nobody, everybody was shocked at what Agustin was doing. They knew of no one that was continuing the creation of this art of ancient Egypt, original paintings and sculptures of that ancient Egyptian style. No one knew of anybody in the world doing that. So they were all amazed and thrilled to see what he was doing and happy of what he was doing. And let me say, from my point of view, I have seen other current art done in the ancient Egyptian style. A lot of it was copies of what I saw other artists doing, were copies of things. But when I look at the faces in those paintings done by others, and you can say I'm prejudiced, and probably I am, I didn't see life. When you're in ancient Egypt and you're looking at carvings on stone or paintings inside a tomb or the walls inside of a tomb, when you look at the face and you look at the eyes of whoever it is who's portrayed, as simplistic as the ancient Egyptian art style was, you see life. I see life. I see a soul. I see a person. I feel a person. And what Agustin did, I think his admiration of it all gave him the ability to capture that. So when I look at the faces that Agustin painted, I see life and souls, and just like the ancient Egyptian ones. And I think the Egyptians that we met, from government officials to artists, I think they saw that too, and that's why they were so impressed with what Agustin was doing.
And you also met archaeologists and curators. I think you had a personal tour from the director of the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities. Is that right? Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, when Agustin had his exhibit in Washington, and a couple of the exhibits that he did, he met people from uh, Egypt that were involved with the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibit that was going on at that time in Washington, and curators of it and so on. And we got a personal tour of the Treasures of Tutankhamun exhibit that was at the National Gallery of Art in Washington. Um, this was slightly prior to our exhibit to Egypt, and they were thrilled with the art that Agustin was doing, so they invited him, and we had a personalized tour of the exhibit in Washington. So then, when we went to Egypt, we met with them. They were associated with the Cairo Museum in Cairo, Egypt, and so we went to that museum many times and met with them there. They gave us tours, or they had a curator take us on a tour of other parts of the Cairo Museum. We saw parts of it that were normally closed to the public. He was allowed to photograph all of the sarcophagi that we saw, the mummy cases, because that was one of the main things that Agustin was doing, was painting that's like the lid of a mummy case, the lid of a sarcophagus, a shaped canvas, rounded like the lids of the sarcophagus that we saw in Egypt. So they gave him permission to photograph all of those that he wanted to in the Cairo Museum. So we had all of those inside advantages that was really exciting and very interesting. And I feel privileged that I was a part of that.
You also went, I believe, into the Pyramid of Giza, and Augustine actually went into the sarcophagus and lay there. I mean, this is something in the book, it sounded like a fantasy, but it really happened. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, he wrote quite a bit about that, the biggest pyramid there in Egypt. Um, we did go inside several times because it's hard for your brain to take it in. So you feel compelled. We felt compelled to keep going back and spending more time on the outside as well as on the inside. So we did go inside of several times, and one of those times he decided to lie in the what looks like an empty sarcophagus with no lid that's inside the king's chamber of the Cheops pyramid. It's there. That's there, made of granite, black granite. And while we were in there, one of the times he decided to lie inside and just lie there and see what it felt like. And it was unnerving to me because he didn't tell me that's what he was going to do. I'm standing there with him, and all of a sudden he's climbing in And I'm saying, what are you doing? And he didn't answer me. And then he lies down inside, and it wasn't necessarily clean inside, but he did it anyway. And then he's lying down in there like this with his eyes closed. And I don't know what he's doing. So I thought, okay, let me give him a minute. And then a few minutes goes by and he's still lying there. And are you okay? Did you get overwhelmed by something? Are you all right? And he was. But that experience triggered dreams and or fantasies that resulted in stories that are in the book that Larry you're mentioning. So being there, being inside the sarcophagus that's there was something he wanted to experience as much as he could and absorb as much as he could from it. And then it came out in the form of dreams and fantasies, some of which are in the book, which does give a sense from an artist's point of view of what it's like, because you really can't put into words. You can't really describe those things. They're just so incredible that we don't have words. We don't have a way to express it. So Agustin expressed it in a way of through what he called these dreams and fantasies that are in the book. And by the way, so much of what Agustin did, you just discover after you read the book, is based on visual. It's like he was a visual person, and it's like everything that he did was based on what he saw in his mind. So as he wrote in the introduction of the book, this book is a visually written book. He was writing descriptions of what he saw in his head. So all of these dreams and fantasies, as well as his just flat out descriptions of what he was seeing there, was all based on the pictures he had in his head, and then trying to put that into words in various ways, whether it's a straight paragraph of description or whether it was a dream that he wrote about or a fantasy that he wrote about. It all came from pictures in his head.
Let me ask another question. He was very prolific in the Egyptian period. He did over 500 works of Egyptian themed art. Part of the book is also about his experience in the art world in the United States. You talked about the Tutankhamun exhibit coming to Washington and you having a tour. At that time, he had an exhibit in Washington. He writes about he had some problems getting exhibited, and you were involved in that. So part of the book is about Egypt, but part of the book is about the American art world, or at least the American art world in Washington, D.C. Can you tell us a little about that experience?
Yeah, it was difficult. For one thing, when he would go to a potential commercial gallery to talk to them about possibly having an exhibit of his work, they were so shocked when they saw his work because there wasn't nobody else doing that in the world. And so they didn't know how to take it. They didn't know whether this was a fantastic, wonderful thing that would bring credibility to their gallery, or if it was just so far out, too far out, and it would bring the opposite of what you would want to your commercial gallery. So a lot of them didn't know how to deal with it. And then there was also the political aspect, that since he was from Cuba, therefore his art was political, which seems absurd. Art is art. But in Washington, D.C., in particular, everything is political. Even things that are not political are treated politically. So they saw his art as political, to the point where, in some cases, collectors, people who purchased his work, who were Jewish, would have family members say to them, "Why do you have this anti-Jewish art in your home?" And to him, it was not political in any way. To the person who bought it, it was not. It's an ancient art that had nothing to do with politics. But especially in Washington, a lot of people see everything as political. So he probably should have moved to California or New York or something. He probably should have changed his name and denied where he or hid where he was from, or pretended to be French or something. Had an accent, so though you couldn't get, you had to deal with that. But he probably should have lied and said he was French or something, and then he would have had a more successful art career. But he wouldn't do that. He was very proud of who he was and where he came from, and proud of what Cuba was before Castro, the Cuba that he grew up in. So his art career was successful, but only limited success, I would say, because of that political aspect and living in Washington.
There's another aspect of the book, now that you mentioned the Cuban side, because in addition to the stories about the Washington art world and the stories of the trip to Cuba, another set of picaresque tales is about his life in Cuba and especially his escape from Cuba and how he made his way to Montreal, to Paris, to Madrid, having a variety of jobs before coming to the United States. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Once, after being arrested in Cuba twice, simply because at that time he was working as an actor, and at the time he was starting his career as an actor, still studying but also working as an actor, the Castro government decided, okay, it's time to take over the art industry in Cuba. So he started attacking and jailing artists, painters, writers, musicians, to let them know who was in charge so that they would start creating what he wanted them to create music that would support the revolution, to use the art world to further his own political and power desires. So Agustin was caught up in that. He was arrested twice, and it was clear that if he stayed in Cuba, that's what would continue, and eventually he would be in a concentration camp or something. So he realized he needed to leave. And it was advised too by family members who were part of the secret police. They told him too, you're going to have to leave, otherwise you're going to be locked up at some point. So they were, it was interesting that they were willing to help a family member, even though that was going against their job. The family came first to his family members, even the secret police members. Anyway, through some advice from them as well as others, he found out that at the time, one way to get out of Cuba was to get scholarships in another country. And then the Cuban government would give you permission to take advantage of that scholarship, get an education that did not cost Cuba anything, and then come back and be a more educated comrade, a more educated citizen of Cuba without costing Cuba anything. So he used that. He found he was able to get 2 scholarships in Canada. And with that, through a long, complicated process, he got permission from the Cuban government to leave, to go to Canada. So unfortunately one of the scholarships he was too late by the time the Cuban government gave him permission. It was too late to use that scholarship. The other scholarship did not include anything except the tuition. And so that meant he would have to work to support himself. And at that time, Canada would not give permission for somebody in his situation to work. He could not get permission to work from the Canadian government. He worked for a while as a busboy in a restaurant until the restaurant got raided, and the restaurant had to fire everybody that was in a situation like his. So anyway, after that, he went to Paris, because in Paris he could get permission to work. So he did things like scrubbing floors and things in Paris until he realized that if he lived in Madrid, he would be able to work as an actor. So a lot more opportunities because of the language situation. So he moved to Madrid, and for the year and a half before he came to the United States, in Madrid, he worked as an actor. He even went into dress designing. Who knew that he knew how to design dresses, but he did. And a friend's mother was a haute couture seamstress, so they had a business doing that. While he waited for permission to come to approvals, visa and everything to come to the United States. So he did all of that. He was always busy working when he was in Paris and Madrid doing all kinds of things until he came to the United States. So in the book, he does write in great detail about what the situation became in Cuba after Castro for somebody in the field of acting. And he had a lot of friends, musician friends, opera singers, and other actors. And so he talks about all that and what happened with them as well, their careers as a result of Fidel Castro. So then after all the arrests, and he decided he had to leave. So all that's in the book, including the day that he actually left, where he went through the famous for people that were Cubans who left Cuba legally, who flew out by airline. There was a process that you would go to the airport in Havana and you would sit there and wait for the government to call your name and go through all your papers and see if everything is in order, to see if they're actually going to let you leave or they're going to find some excuse why you can't leave. So you sit there in horror all day long from 6 a.m. until about midnight, and usually with family members watching through the glass. His mother and father, aunt and uncle were there all day watching through the glass until finally they did not find any reason to prevent him from leaving. So he was able to leave. He writes about that. That's a common experience for people leaving Cuba legally. So it's very telling, and it's a tough chapter to read in a way because of what they put the people through just because they decided to make it uncomfortable as they could for the people. It's horrible.
And when he got to Spain, this is the final obsession, which is up here. There's also the story of Sarita Montiel, a famous movie star, who I called him Dulcinea, but he calls her my virgin, like the Virgin Mary. He worships her. And you actually were with him. There's a photo in the book, I don't know if it's going to come out on this, of him with Sara Montiel. There it is. You took this photo at Lincoln Center in 1975. It's his quest to meet her. He finally meets her. What, from your point of view, is the significance of his obsession with Sarah Montiel? He even has fantasies in the book of a fantasy parody of one of her famous films, Cinnamon Skin. As you said, he wrote screenplays for her. He mentions those in the book. There was some continuing contact. Could you talk about his relationship, both imaginary and real, what it meant with Sarah Montiel?
Yeah, that was a puzzle to me because the whole time I knew him, she was a part of his thinking. And in the book, I think it explains it to some extent, at least, that being a very visual person, and as he said, she was known for her beauty. And he said she had a perfect face, the ideal of beauty, with everything in her face 100% in proportion. That if somebody was going to try to design the perfect face, hers would be the face that they would design. That's what he saw in this very highly developed visual part of his brain. So he had seen some movies of hers that were made in Mexico. They were not, they were maybe grade B movies or something. They did not take advantage of her beauty. But then when he saw the movie The Last Couplet that she made in Spain, after making some movies in Madrid, she was offered this, and in Hollywood too. She was offered this film to do in Madrid, which she agreed to do. It was a musical. She was a singer as well, so that was part of it. But in that movie, they took advantage of her beauty. I say the movie makers did, and she did too, because she knew what lighting was best for her face and so on. And so she imposed those things into the directors and the photographer of the movie and so on. So it really took advantage of her beauty, her physical beauty, and the role she was playing was a very charming young lady. So when he saw that movie and his relative that said you should see this movie, the relative it was who said to him, she looks like a virgin. And then he said in his head, as you say, Larry, that she became his virgin, and he referred to her as that. I don't know, there was, to use the term virgin is not the same as like Virgin Mary with a lot of the religious aspects associated with like the Virgin Mary, not so much, but the fact that she lived her life fully. She was a very well-liked person. She tried all kinds of things in her life. And he admired her for working so hard, having such a good work ethic. I think that was another of the things that everything she did the best she could possibly do it. And that was an inspiration for him. So when he was living in Madrid for a year and a half, and she lived in Madrid, as he talks about in the book, all the schemes to try to meet her. He wanted to meet her, but not as a fan, not as, would you give me an autograph? No, he wanted to meet her as somebody, have the opportunity to sit and talk with her for a few minutes, at least a few minutes. That was a goal that he had. And the year and a half he lived there, he did see her in person at a movie premiere, but all of his schemes to try to have a little sit down meeting with her, talk with her, man to man, friend to friend, that didn't happen. But when he and I went on a vacation to Europe, we were in Madrid for 4 days. He came up with another scheme to try to meet her, which was to write a screenplay for her. And we dropped that off at her apartment and then left it with the maid who would give it to her for her to read. And indeed, apparently she did read it because the phone rang in the hotel where we were staying and it was her. Excuse me, I get choked up about all this. She sang to him over the phone. They had a 20-minute conversation, like professional to professional. Since he had been an actor, since he wrote the screenplay, and she was an actress, and they were like a peer-to-peer phone call, which was a dream for him, a dream come true. And then when she did a concert in Lincoln Center in New York, we went to see it. And after the concert, he said, we're going to the dressing room. We had never been to the Lincoln Center before, but he said, we're going to the dressing room. How do you know how to get to the dressing room? He said, I know theaters. I'm an actor. I know theaters. I thought he was crazy, but I followed him. Like wherever he went, I stuck to him like flypaper, and voila, we're in the dressing room with Sara Montiel. And that's when I took that picture. So he met with her twice on a peer-to-peer type of situation, which was very nice for him, very inspirational for him. And I think he got a lot of his drive from his mother, because his mother was one to anything his mother started, she finished. I think he got a lot of that from her, but I think he also got a lot of positives from his being inspired by what he called his virgin, Sara Montiel.
All right, and we did send a copy to the Sarah Montiel Museum in La Mancha, Spain, which is interestingly the same area that Don Quixote takes place in. In fact, the museum is in one of the windmills that's in Don Quixote that Don Quixote fought. So I thought that was appropriate, and they were
That's
very
where she
happy
was
to take
born.
the book. So that
That's where
was
she was born. So
it's an interesting completion. So there'll always be a piece of him in the Sarah Montiel Museum. I guess now we should wrap this up. But before we go, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the plans for the future. I know there's an online gallery that you've put together of all of his artwork. I know that his movies about Cuba are on a YouTube channel. Uh, I know there's an audiobook that's now available with an actor, Hopper Stone, reading the Killer Flies of Luxor on audible.com. People can listen to it in their car. I know that you've been talking to some museums in Miami, maybe about doing a retrospective or tribute to Augustine. And then also there's the University of Miami has in their archives the papers of Agustin Blazquez. And you may be sending them some more of his mementos. Could you talk a little bit about the afterlife of Agustin Blazquez?
yeah, he worked so hard, and for the goal of freedom, he did not want what happened in Cuba with Castro's revolution. He did not want that to happen anywhere else. He worked to try to end Castro's reign of Cuba, which did not happen in his lifetime. Even after Castro died, Castro's plan continues to this day. Unfortunately, Epstein tried to do his part to bring attention to the world as to what was actually happening there. And because he didn't want it to happen anywhere else. So if my effort is to try to continue to bring attention to that issue and how important freedom is. And if Agustin's work can continue to have an impact beyond his lifetime, that's my goal. So thank you, Larry, for the idea to build the website of his art, give you credit for the idea. And so there is the website of all of the art that I have access to and that I could get pictures of. And they're all there. The only ones, well, he kept a log of everything that he did, all the art that he did in the United States. So that gave me an inventory. That was a starting point. And so everything that was in his log is shown in the website. I have photographs of most of them, some of them that were sold or given away. I don't have a way to have a photograph of those. Maybe someday somebody who owns them can send me a picture and I'll put it on the website. So there's that. And then, as you said, we're hoping to have a retrospective in the museum in Miami that ideally would have his art, be able to show some of his documentaries. He also he did music videos also and some art videos, as well as the documentary with Larry. So hopefully some of those films can be shown there at the museum, as well as have some of his art there, as a way to hopefully continue Agustin's effort to have a positive impact on the world, because he worked so hard, and most of it was without pay. Very little of what he did he get paid for. he didn't do it for the pay. He did it for the right reasons. So if that effort can continue to benefit anybody out there, then I hope I can be a part of that.
And if you could just give us the address for the website of his art gallery, uh, and I guess on YouTube you can just Google Agustin Blazquez. I'll put a link below. But if you could tell people, sometimes they like to hear, what is the art gallery called, to look it up on the internet.
Yeah, if you just the address for the website of the art is just AB, like Agustin Blazquez, just the A and the B, artgallery.com. So it's very simple, just abartgallery.com.
Well, I think that's all we can do for now. I would ask you to go more into your personal relationship with Augustine, but you're very modest. But you were his producer, you were his curator, you were his friend, you were his guide. In the book, he tells stories how you get him out of trouble when he was fighting with gallery owners and so forth and so on. So you were also a troubleshooter and an advisor. And of course, you were his editor, and now you're executor and heir. Um, this is the book, maybe Jams of the Killer Flies of LUXOR, partial autobiography, travel chronicles, dreams, and fantasies. It's available in hardback, paperback, audiobook, Kindle. You can get it at your local bookstore. They'll probably have to order it, but it's available through Ingram. And hopefully, if you don't want to pay, you can ask your library to order a copy, because it's carried commercially by Ingram as well as Amazon. So you can get it in any format, and you can order it from anywhere in the world. And we'll keep tuned. I'll update this down below when we find out if we get the show in Miami, and then what happens at the Miami University Archives, and so forth. Are there any final thoughts you have, Jones?
Mm, no, I just think that what he was trying to do in his life was very noble and can be a benefit to the world. So if it would be great for that to continue, I hope it can.
All right. Well, thank you. I want to say again, I think the book would be a wonderful last minute Christmas gift if anyone doesn't have something. It's very entertaining. It reminded me of Almodovar films, or maybe Louis Buñuel. It had a real surrealistic quality. It's a series of picaresque adventures set at different times and places. And what's interesting, it's in English with a Spanish accent, as he says. So that's very unusual. And with that, I just want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope 2024 brings a renewed interest in the work and life of Agustin Blazquez. And thank you very much. And we'll stop now.